This is like toxic feminism that's being perpetuated by spirit-voiced, very gentle, overly agreeable men in the church.
Even the boomers, like, they're not to be blamed on this. When I looked it up, it was like in the 50s and 60s when people started throwing this phrase around.
And I could literally see him taking his emotions and just like tamping them down and just like, and he's just like, well, I gotta go help out my wife.
Take that mentality and you shove it into a modern relationship where people are coming in as equal partners wanting to make something work, and it just messes everything up.
And now for a cultural callout. We sure don't appreciate that.
Welcome back to Salty Saints. My name is Hayden Holm. Today I'm joined by my brother Tanner, and in today's cultural callout, we're talking about a mantra that has plagued the men of my generation for their entire married lives. And that mantra is, happy wife, happy life. So let's explore this mantra. Where did it come from? Why is it here? What is it about? What are some of the side effects of it? But let me tell you, first things first, that this was the one piece of marriage advice that I got. It seemed like almost universally from everyone. Every brother in the church that approached me as I was getting married, as I was engaged, came up and they just gave me this look and they just said, happy wife, happy life, buckle up, buddy. You know, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's an interesting take. You know, that's great. You know, I'm all for it. And then after getting married, I quickly realized that Chanel didn't get that same mantra. There is no other mantra for the women that say like, happy husband, happy life. The women don't get that advice. The women don't get that at all. As I come to find out from Chanel's experience, I was like, did you get any advice? And you're like, nah, no. And so how does that check out with your experience? Am I off on my own island, just crazy here?
No, I got that a lot too. And I like on its face, it makes logical sense. Like, if your wife is happy, your life will be easier. So it's like, okay, you just kind of smile and nod. But
That
if you
checks
think
out.
about it for a second, it's like, what does that actually, what action do I need to take based off that? What is that calling me to do? You know, it's really kind of bizarre. And Hannah, like, same thing. There's no like, take care of your husband and everything will be okay. In fact, there's the opposite. When you get engaged, everyone's like, hey, husbands to be, if you screw this up, I'm gonna kill you. If you
That's
hurt my
right.
friend
Yeah.
Hannah, if you hurt my daughter, if you hurt my sister, I'm gonna mess you up. Like, there's like, it's
I'm going
you're gonna,
to cause you harm. Yeah.
yeah, don't screw this up is what I got a lot. Or it's like, hey, just make sure she's happy, and that's your primary goal. Which
Yeah.
it's not untrue. Like, it's not untrue to the fact that, like, yeah, you should make sure your spouse is happy. Like, that's a great thing you should clock every day, is like, how is my spouse doing today, right? But that's not
Right.
actually what it means, or like that. At least what I've been communicated from other people who told me that when I was getting married. Like, when the actual actions behind of, like, how do you keep your wife happy, lead to like this weird, bizarre place of, like, I don't know, like weird pseudo submission to your wife in a lot of ways that just end up making you very resentful and unable to communicate what you're actually feeling most of the time. So I'm sure that's
Right.
I'm
Well,
sure that's how you
let's get
feel as
into
well.
that a little bit. Yeah. No, I remember getting similar advice. It was that advice, and then I also got advice from other men that just said, "Get out of her way." Okay. She calls the
Yeah.
shots in your house. You shut up. You sit down, and you listen to her. She is everything. Okay, and you are nothing. And I remember that that left me feeling like a little bit like, oh, okay, all right, well, whatever, I guess, you know. So let's explore this a little bit more. Like, let's dive in a little bit to figure out what this looks like in practice. So from the marriages that you observed that practiced the happy wife, happy life mantra, how did that actually, in a boots on the ground manner, affect that relationship?
Well, I mean, I had some good examples and some not so good examples. Some good examples, you just see them like calmly existing in a neutral space. That's like the best case scenario, you know? The bad
Yeah.
examples, you have these older couples who've lived together forever, and the husband's lived by this mantra, and he's bent over and angry, just muttering to himself all the time, all the things he wishes he could say, but he can't because that would make his wife not happy, and then that would make his life not happy. So he's just going to keep it all inside until one day his heart stops. Like that's just
I have absolutely seen that. There are couples out there that adopt this mantra, they adopt this mindset, and it leads to these deformed marriages where all of the responsibility is then schlepped onto the back of the husband in that role, and his back becomes so muscular that he becomes like the hunchback of Notre Dame because he
yeah.
has to carry so
He
much weight, and he's
literally
just like
starts hunching over. Yeah.
he's just walking around there trying to sing like one more day, or whatever, and he's just like hoping to get out. You can see it in his eyes. He's just super agreeable. Whatever his wife wants, she gets.
And I don't like this isn't like a call out against all women. I actually feel like the women of our generation are victims of this as well. It's not doing them any favors at all,
Yeah.
right? Because it's cultivating men who just want them to make the decision and want to be errand boys, where I feel like
Yes.
maybe I'm out in left field on this one, but I feel like a lot of women want men to be decision makers in most areas of their family and marriage, right? And there's some
Right.
key areas where women would like to make, decisions, but in most areas, I feel like they'd rather defer to their husband and say, "Can you just take care of this? Can you just
Sure.
choose where we're going to go eat dinner we're going to have dinner tonight, or can you just choose the movie?" I mean, those are silly
Yeah.
examples, but like I think deep down there's that shift there where if men are just trying to make their wives happy, then they're shifting all of the decision making to the wife. And I don't think anybody in from either side, male or female, wants all the decision making power. That's way too
Well,
stressful.
they don't, and it leads to a generation of women. I mean, I know there's a term out there that came about just like 5 to 10 years ago. Do you remember the Karens? Right?
Yeah.
I think
Oh yeah.
that
Still
term
here.
came from the happy wife, happy life couples, right? Because it's a generation of women that grew up believing that they were the morning and the evening star, that the universe revolves around them. And so it deforms them as well. So you have these misshapen marriages where you've got women running around. I'm gonna sound like Lord of the Rings over here, like unchecked, unchallenged, just doing whatever they want, filling them with this, unearned sense of power that makes them feel like they can talk to everybody's manager and dictate the rules wherever they go. And then you have their spouses, which are just a bunch of men that are just kind of hobbled over, very overly agreeable, but also very resentful at the same time. That
Yeah.
are just like they don't
Well,
actually tell you what they think. They will say whatever they think you want to hear, but deep down they will have their own opinions, but they bottle that crap down and they keep that
yeah.
lid closed tight, and
Oh
it
yeah.
manifests in them just exploding randomly whenever you try and like comment on a Google Doc, in a word council or something like that, for a completely random example. But
Yeah, it has to come out eventually. But it's
it
funny that you
does.
bring out the Lord of the Rings because the mental picture I had in my mind was when Frodo, who is panicked, offers the Ring of Power to Galadriel, right? Like
Oh
he's
yeah.
afraid of this power, so he's like, "Do you want it?" And then she goes super psycho mode and says, "You should have you would choose to have a queen, right? And all shall love me in despair." Like it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what the modern man is doing. The modern man's Frodo in that moment and saying, like, "Can you take this burden from me? Can you want it?" And half of the
Yeah.
women are saying, "I'll take it," and they become that evil queen, right?
Right.
That
Like
that
the
they
lights
love
go
and
down,
despair.
her face gets
Yeah,
super dark, her hair just shoots out everywhere, and you
yeah,
shall have a queen. And it's like, ah,
yeah. Like, oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah. So like the men, the boy, little boy's getting married, right? Instead of
yep.
offering that ring to Galadriel, you need to take that burden and you need to take it all the way to Mount Doom. I don't know how far we can stretch this metaphor, but that's about as far as I can get there.
We
But
are
I
running
think
it
that
into
was
the ground a little, but I love it. I
yeah.
love it.
Yeah, I think it's very apt that there's some of that responsibility you have to keep to yourself as a man. Be like, no, I need to take care of you in this way, and that means making some decisions and drawing some boundaries so we can actually have a happy marriage, which doesn't make people happy all the time. I know that, and women should do this too. They should draw boundaries too that will make their husbands unhappy sometimes. That's just part of
Yeah.
negotiating a marriage. It's really hard work.
So, what do you mean by boundaries that make them unhappy?
Well, I mean, like, I think there's a lot of boundaries you can draw to make them unhappy, right? But there's sometimes, like, for instance, When I work at home, but when I'm in my office, I need to be in my office, right? And I can't have kids
Yeah.
running in and out unless I have the door unlocked, and then that's my choice, right? So
Yeah.
even though there's some times where Hannah could really use my help, she knows that she can't interrupt me because I have to do my work. Even though technically I could sneak away sometimes and help, there's a boundary that needs to be drawn there so I can feel safe enough to work and comfortable enough to understand what I need to do and be flexible and offer help when I can. But, if she's constantly asking me for help, then that puts pressure on me, right? And leads to an
Yeah.
unhappy husband, right? Which I
That
could
does.
just
Yeah.
I could just work all night. I could just, when the
Yeah. You
kids
could just
go to
bottle that
bed,
up. Yeah.
yeah, I could do all my work and I could be totally flexible during the day, go out and help with the kids all day, and then just work all night and just, have a heart attack and or an aneurysm in 3 years. And that would be a happy
Totally.
life, happy life, happy wife, happy lifestyle, right? Because, I'm doing everything to serve her on that front. But so I think that
Yeah.
no, you have to stand up and be like, no, I actually have needs as a man, which for some reason in this world is perceived as weakness to have needs as a man. Like,
You're not
I actually
allowed to
do.
have those.
I need to go play with my friends. Like I need to do that. Men should be
Yeah.
doing that, and because they're not, we have suicide rates that are through the roof. So, I think that
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of things that we need to start doing on that front. That both men and women of our generation, and even like the Gen Xers and Boomers, they're all victims of this, right? So we're not showing hate to
Even
any
the
of those.
boomers.
Even the boomers, like they're not to be blamed on this. When I looked it up, it was like in the 50s and 60s when people started throwing this phrase around. And that is right when the veterans from World War II are coming home and creating that new generation. So they're not to
Yeah.
blame. We don't, it's the silent generation, right? They're the ones before that. So,
Yeah.
which, I mean,
Yeah.
they ended World War II, so I can't fault them too much for throwing, some silly words around and causing a cultural mishap. But
Right. But I think domestic abuse was also pretty rampant around
yeah, it
that
was really
time as
bad.
well. So,
There's a lot of
so
messed up things from that era. So
right.
it's, yeah, 100%.
So the thing is, here's the deal. I've seen this manifest in a couple different ways. So there was one time, and I'm glad you were talking about setting boundaries and determining your own needs and standing firm on those. There was one time where, as an elders quorum in one of my wards, we set up a recurring pickleball night, and we started playing pickleball, and we were having a lot of fun. And there was one brother every single time we played pickleball, without fail, every time he would get a message. He'd pull out his phone. And let me just add, he was one of the best pickleballers I've ever seen. Like, he was hitting it between the legs. He was doing it like backwards. He was basically Neo with a pickleball paddle. And he would pull out his phone. He would look at his messages. And then I saw his spirit just leave through his eyes. And his eyes would just
Oh,
glaze over. And he would just go, oh. And then we were like, hey, what's going on, man? And he was just like, and I could literally see him taking his emotions and just like tamping them down and just like, and he's just like, well, I got to go help out my wife. She just said that she needs help putting our 1 year old to bed. So I got to go help her. And then every single time he left. And I remember thinking, like, that poor man who loves playing pickleball was connecting with the quorum, is now at home helping his wife put one child to bed, which
yep. See, and like there's
it,
so many different things wrong with that scenario, right? Like there's like just to jump in real quick, like the fact
yeah,
that she feels like she needs help, and the fact that he is the man, because like as a man, you're told that your number one priority is your family, right? So you should do everything
yeah,
for your family, sacrifice everything for your family. So it actually lines up with his moral compass, I'm sure, to sacrifice the fun of pickleball to go take care of his family. And that's being
yeah,
weaponized against him accidentally by his wife who can't handle putting the baby to bed. Now, I
yeah.
think that the psychological effect of what, or the event that's called learned helplessness, I think is what comes in a lot with different families and different spouses like this, because I feel like there's a dependency there. Like, and this happens on
Mm,
both sides. When Hannah's busy in the evenings to going to like Relief Society meeting or something, and I have to
yeah,
cook dinner, I go in there and I look at the fridge. I'm like, oh, I can't. I don't. I can't do it. I don't know. I just, I have to like
Yeah,
pace from the pantry to the fridge like 4 or 5 times before I can like man up and actually cook something for my kids, because I've
yeah,
become dependent on her doing that. And I feel like the more you fudge the boundaries and the fuzzier things get, the more you depend on your spouse to do those things, and you learn a sense of helplessness around those things. Like I can't put the baby to
yeah.
bed by myself because my husband's been helping me for the past 2 years. So
Right,
I
right.
think that, I mean, it's a whole can of worms for
Well,
sure.
and it seems like you get into this almost positive feedback loop where the happy wife, happy life mantra will feed into that, and it makes them become more helpless, which then makes you have to repress your emotions even more and help them even more, which makes them even more helpless. It's a
Yeah.
vicious, never-ending cycle, which is really difficult to have to deal with. But I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult with the age of work from home. So if you are
Yeah.
not careful with those boundaries, they can bleed like crazy. And if they bleed, you can quickly turn into a full-time employee and full-time dad at the same time
Yeah.
where like you're doing your work for like 5 minutes and then it's like, hey, I need some help over here, and then you have to run. And I'm not saying that Chanel does that. We've been working from home since 2016. We have iron boundaries set. And so
Yeah.
I made intentional focus in work to make sure, and she is fantastic with not with respecting my work hours and making sure that that's respected. But
100%.
I think those boundaries have to be established, and I don't think that is happening with a happy wife, happy lifer. And so there's another guy that I knew in the elders quorum. His wife talking about like learned helplessness. Like there was one day, like she wakes up, she had like two little kids, and he gets home from work. He was working a really long day. He was between jobs. It was really stressful. So he was studying and he was working at like this part-time gig. So he gets back home like 7, 8 o'clock at night. The kids are screaming, they're crying, they're running, they're jumping all over the place. The house is a complete mess. The TV's on full blast. And she looks at him and she's just like, she's in her pajamas and she's like, it's just, I feel so bad. They just watch TV all day. And this brother had an opportunity. He had an opportunity to sit down and counsel and say, like, hey, we need to both be pulling our weight. But instead, I think that happy wife, happy life mantra kicked in and like a little marionette made him say, at least they're alive. You've done your part. Okay. It's like, you had a chance, but you blew it, kid. You blew it. Because at that point, she's just like, oh, okay. Great. And then she fell back into whatever she was doing. Like, I got to go take a break. These kids have been too tough for me all day. I got to go. And so then he ended up cooking dinner and anyway, but it's a big problem. And for that reason, I have put together a list. I asked AI, I said, hey, give me 10 signs that would show me that I was actually a victim of this mantra, that I actually believe it. And so let's go over some of those
Let's do
signs,
it.
all right? Okay. Sign number 1, defers to wife. Lets wife decide roles or activities, even against own preferences. So this goes back to the pickleball guy. Yeah, this goes back to like,
Oh, yeah.
hey, you're not going to play. You're not going out tonight. You're going to stay home and you're going to help me with roles that I should be taking care of myself. Okay. Number 2, avoids conflict, stays silent in disagreements to keep wife happy. So this is
Mhm.
going back. I don't want to call them the silent generation just because I don't want to confuse anybody, but
But it
this
goes
is a
back that
very
far.
very agreeable generation. Suppresses needs, hides struggles or opinions to prioritize wife's needs. Number 4, seeks approval, checks with wife publicly before committing to tasks. So we'll constantly be checking in with the wife, making sure that everything's okay with her before he's like, okay, yeah, I can do this, or I might be able to do that. Number 5, feels responsible, acts anxious if wife is upset, trying to fix her mood. So he feels responsible for how the wife feels and how she is behaving and her whole life and attitude. So it's basically this basically it's making the wife into an object instead of an
Yeah.
agent who can act. It's saying like, no, I have to take care of you, and if you're ever upset, it's my fault. uh
Right.
lack lacks boundaries is number 6. So overcommits to wife's interests, neglecting own well-being. So that can very well manifest for those work-at-homers if your wife is constantly pulling you in and out of meetings and saying like, hey, you need to help me with this and you need to do that. Number 7, shows passive aggression, uses sarcasm or withdrawal when frustrated. So like if it's cold in there, it's not because you left the fridge open, it's because she's giving you the cold shoulder. All right. Like can use withdrawal of affection as a weapon to get you to manipulate you. So that's a form of passive aggression. Hints at resentment. So subtly expresses feeling undervalued in conversations. And this is obviously from the husband, not the wife. And then number 9, prioritizes wife's involvement. So focuses on wife's roles over own responsibilities. This is something that we're seeing when, like, one of the common veins of comments that I get, especially when I talk about like Elders Quorum activities, is that men often feel guilty. They feel a guilt associated with spending time doing something that they find enjoyable. They kind of view their work as their responsibility, and then when they're not working, they should be at home with their family. That's their mentality, is like, okay, and then taking care of themselves is right, probably past like cleaning out the gutters and maybe cleaning the grout in the tile. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, now I can take care of myself down here. So that is definitely one of the symptoms of the happy wife, happy life mantra. And number 10, appears disconnected, seems emotionally distant in interactions. So as I'm going through those 10 signs, I want you to picture your average elders quorum, okay? Focuses on wife's roles over own responsibilities. So appears disconnected, lacks boundaries, overcommits, seeks approval, feels responsible, avoids conflict, suppresses needs. Ringing any bells? Ding, 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 ding. You know, it's like, I think this is one of the most prevalent ideologies, and it's corrosive. And I think it's one of the most dangerous ideologies that has been a product of the North American culture. Modern society has been pushing on this on us for a really long time. And I think it's led, not entirely, but I would say this is one of the pieces why we see so many men that refuse to engage with the quorum. I think the main reason why they go to church is because they believe that church is good for their wives. They believe that they are doing her a service, and they're saying, all right, I need to make sure that you get to Relief Society. They get her to Relief Society, hold their hand, get her to the door. They get into Elders Quorum, and they're like, okay, now I can finally have time to myself. You know, and they pull out their phone, and they're like, I'm checking out. I'm done. And I did my part. And then they scroll, because like with that last video that we did, there were a lot of people that were like, I have tried everything. These men, there's something going on outside of the quorum that is affecting them. I think this could be one of the things that is impacting them, is their relationship with their spouse. And the foundation of that relationship is this ideology. But well, you look like you're going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how many times have you heard men say, we got to get to church on time today because I need to commune with my brethren in Elders Quorum? You know, like, that's just, no one's ever done that. You know, like, that's never been, we got to get to church on time because we got to get our kids to church so they grow up to be good people, you know, like, and got to get the wife to church because she wants to go commune with her Relief Society. Because, like, you know, women actually really enjoy getting together as a Relief Society and mingling, right? Where men are just like, no, I'm going to tap out. But I think that, like you were saying, I was just thinking back about that happy wife, happy life phrase. And it comes like, if you go way back in time, it feels like it's almost like something that you would say, or a mantra that you would believe in if you didn't consider your wife like a full partner, right? If you consider her as like a subordinate in your house, you know, like, hey, don't forget to water the garden, you know, hey, don't forget to pay the lawnmower. You know, it's like, hey, happy wife, happy life. You know, got to make sure she's taking care of the house, and you're going to come home and dictate everything. Like, just don't neglect her. You know, buy her some jewelry, buy her some chocolates, give her money, and that'll solve everything, right? But then we have this entire, like, we have like half a century of progression, and, you know, with women becoming as equal to men as possible. But that mentality of happy wife, happy life somehow persisted, right? So you have this like coping mechanism of like, I'm a man and I don't want to have a real relationship with my wife, so I'm just going to give her money and treat her kind of like a nice housemaid or whatever, and then you take that mentality and you shove it into a modern relationship where people are coming in as equal partners wanting to make something work, and it just messes everything up, right? Like it just
It
skews
does.
everyone's perception of reality to the point where, like, I don't think women are to blame, I don't think men are to blame. I think it's just an old ideology that just needs to die as soon as
Yeah.
possible. It'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're bringing it up because you're touching down on a very valuable point. The and like if you look at the Mother's Day disparity here, like how we treat Mother's Day in the church versus how we treat Father's Day, right? This is something that actually really upsets Chanel because she sees the dad's root beer being passed out on Father's Day after we just gave Mother's Day like an entire Great Harvest gourmet spread in the second hour off, and we took over their callings and we did all of that. It actually makes her upset to see that level of disregard given to the men because she feels infantilized by the ward. She feels like the men view her as lesser, like, oh, hey, little guy, here, here are these little treats. You need these treats to keep you happy, right? Here you go, And so she actually views it that way, and I love her to pieces because she views it that way because it's the correct way to view it objectively, right? If you want a
Yeah.
healthy, happy marriage, that is the correct way to view things. Is that you are equals, and this isn't spouting off some heretical idea. It's like that goes straight back to the proclamation of the family. It goes straight back to everything we've been learning in the church. It's men and women are equal partnerships in the responsibilities that they have to carry. So they have to pull the handcart equally,
Yeah.
and
100%. To
and
that
so
point.
if you can't infantilize the other one, and you can't
Yeah.
carry too much. So like you can't let your wife just sit on the handcart and throw rocks at you while you're schlepping through the snow and just like, okay, I love it when you pay so much attention to me. It's like that poem. That poem that every mother has hanging on her fridge, the fridge magnet freaking poem that says like, I love seeing dirty dishes in a pile in my house because it means that I had food to eat and people that love
Yeah.
me so much to disregard the fact that I'm going to now have to spend 8 hours washing those dishes and putting them away. And it's like,
Right.
that's how I think this mantra has been for men. This is the fridge magnet for men, of like, oh, I love it when my family dumps on me and I have to put out all the fires because it means that I
I have
have
a
people
family.
that I care about, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I
But
think you bring up a really good point. Like I have this theory that, and this is probably way off. This is probably crazy, but like the best modern approach to marriage and family is to take a like frontier perspective. You look at old westerns, you see these people who came out here with handcarts and they built a log cabin by themselves. If you're confused about like how to operate with your spouse, like just look at that and look at these people on the brink of death and how they survive in the family.
yeah,
Everybody's doing everything and everyone's trying their hardest. Like that's how your marriage should operate. And there shouldn't be any sort of like happy wife, happy life. That didn't exist. It's like, oh look, there's no flour in the bag. We're all walking, like
that's
you're
right.
pulling the hand cart,
We all have work. Let no
yeah,
one shirk.
for
Yeah,
real.
that's what it was. Yeah,
So somehow we lost that in the mid-century, like 50 to 100 years ago, and everything went haywire after that. So I think we need to get back to that pioneer view of like, hey, we're all gonna do this or we all die. And take that
that's
and
right.
then just subtract the life-threatening scenario and just apply
Yeah.
the work ethic behind it, and you're
Well,
great.
I wouldn't actually subtract the life-threatening scenario. I would modify that. I would say it's spiritually life-threatening
Yeah,
because
there you
that's
go.
what's happening with these elders is that these elders, they're taking on more than they should and it's killing them spiritually on the inside because they do not take care of themselves. Their mental health is through the floor. And there are studies, and I'll link to this in the description. But there is I wanted to pull up the suicide rates again because I think it bears repeating. All right, so this section right here, how are we doing? The 2023 Utah age-adjusted suicide rate was 20.9 per 100,000 population. Males, 32.5 per 100,000 population, had a significantly higher age-adjusted suicide rate compared to females, 9.1 per 100,000 population.
Wow.
See that difference? So this is just men versus women, male versus female. So this is all age ranges in the demographic breakdown there. So 32 versus 9. So if we were to see this bearing out in the data, you would expect if we didn't see, if this was not a thing, if we didn't see a lot of men suppressing and disregarding their own self-care, you would expect that to bear out in the suicide rates, I would imagine. You would expect to see something like, maybe it's about the same, equal. But you're seeing it skew way over to one side. Now, what's interesting right here, in Utah from 2021 to 2023, males had significantly higher suicide rate than females in every age group. Males aged 35 to 44 had the highest suicide rates among males, 49.3 per 100,000 population. Females aged 45 to 54 had the highest suicide rates among female age groups. Now look at this, 15.3 per 100,000 population. So you see the difference there? There's a huge difference. And I'm not trying to say that this is 100% the driver behind it, but I am trying to communicate that this isn't going to help. The happy wife, happy life mantra is not going to help. And I think you touched down on one of the big reasons why. Growing up, you saw men do this. You saw men that were adopting this mentality, treat their wives like infants, infantilizing their wives. And the thing that we were taught growing up was like, if there's ever a problem, it's the man's fault in the relationship, and the man must fix that problem via expensive gifts. So jewelry, you got to get the Brighton jewelry, you got to get the chocolates, you got to get the flowers, you have to do some grand show of affection in order to prove value in her mind, which is incredibly dangerous because that mentality ties your value as a man, as a human being, to the direct dollar amount in your bank account, which means there's an incredible pressure for men to make a lot of money real quick. But the problem is what is going to make you a lot of money a lot of times doesn't align with men's interests, for a lot of men, a lot of men want to pursue what they feel God is inspiring them to do or guiding them towards. Maybe they want to be like a tradesman that doesn't earn very much, but they're like, hey, I'm really good at this. I want to do this, and so this is, I think, one of the cultural weeds that is slowly choking men out.
Yeah, well, it's quite the paradox because it's a catch-22 in the fact that you need to make more money if your value is tied to money, but that also means that you need to spend less time in the home and engage with your family because you have to spend more time making money, right? So the more, then you're called a despondent and disconnected spouse and father, and then there's just no winning on that side, right? And I don't think that women want this, of our generation. They didn't want this.
I don't think so.
And it's close, but like, just my final point on this is that like the happy wife, happy life phrase gets everyone almost there, right? It tells men you need to take care of your spouse. It tells women you should expect your husband to take care of you. But it doesn't tell the men that you should expect your wife to take care of you as well, right? That's the one piece that's missing, right? There should be equal expectations from both sides. Like, we're going to take care of each other. We're both going to pull this handcart all the way to Utah, and then we're going to build our home together, right? So I think that, it's so close. We were so close. It could have been happy spouse, happy house.
We were so close.
We just went off the rails, and now we have to deal with this huge mess with men in the suicide rate. So I think that you're right on the money that it's not helping whatsoever.
Well, so here's the other thing that I want to point out is that it, in large part, I don't think it is coming from the women. I think this is something that men are saying and teaching to the younger men.
Yeah.
And this is
100%.
So from my experience. So I don't think women are to blame at all in this.
They don't want
this
it.
Is,
no.
This is like toxic feminism that's being perpetuated by spirit-voiced, very gentle, overly agreeable men in the church. They're like, hey, she is the sweetest thing ever, and if you have a problem, it's because you're the problem. You understand? You understand that? And then you go away thinking like, I guess I'm the idiot, because I felt frustrated when she made me do a bunch of chores that were on her list, but she had to go to a Relief Society activity, and I need to support her in that, and so I guess, but so here's the
Well,
deal.
real quick, to your prior point, historically, probably in the church, men were the problem in almost every domestic dispute.
I'm
Like
sure.
I
I am
feel like,
absolutely sure of that. Yeah.
like men are rough around the edges. And as we're
Yes.
growing out of that, we need to scale back the level we're telling men, like, hey, you should be wrong about everything because you are, you should be at fault. No, we need to kind of balance that out a little bit as we scale through it.
Right. It reminds me of a scripture in 2nd Nephi. So this is 28:14. It says, they, meaning society at large, wear stiff necks and high heads. Yea, and because of pride and wickedness and abominations and whoredoms, they have all gone astray, save it be a few who are the humble followers of Christ. Nevertheless, which is like the ancient prophet equivalent of like, I'm going to throw a butt in here.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, they, meaning the humble followers of Christ, are led that in many instances they do err because they are taught by the precepts of men. So I'm going to call this, toxic feminism, happy wife, one of the precepts of men that is being taught that is damaging men, causing their hearts to fail them in 2025. So if I were to pull another scriptural equivalent of it, I would say Samson and Delilah. So
Yeah.
Samson, strong, he pursued his covenant with God. He kept that covenant, and he was unbeatable, right? And then what did he end up doing? He ended up he decided to appease Delilah and forsake his covenant. And what ended up happening? That appeasing, instead of pleasing God, he was like, I'm going to try and chase and pursue her and do whatever I have to do to help her. It ended up leading him to break his covenant with God. It ended up to him losing his vision as well and completely destroying his strength. And that is pretty, if you think about that from a symbolic perspective, that's pretty powerful, because it's like these men that are in these relationships, they have lost their vision because they have settled for peace instead of truth for so many years. It has blinded them. They can no longer spiritually discern their situation, and they're kind of wandering about, and they've lost their strength. They've lost that connection with God. They've lost that fire within them. And they're like that Samson figure, who's now just being used as a slave.
Right. Who ultimately ends up just bringing the house down upon himself, which is just really interesting on that. So, yeah, I think that's a great analogy there.
So there is one more thing that I wanted to touch down on. I know this is getting long, but I do want to touch down on it. There's a video that I think is worth playing.
What is difficult about being a man in today's world?
What isn't difficult? Modern men are being made to pay for the sins of a patriarchy that they are no longer the part of. Perfect example of this. There was an article that came out from Robin Dunbar. Studies show that men need 2 guys' nights per week in order to maintain good mental health. The comments were so disgusting from bitter, shallow thinking, mostly women, saying, tell me you're a man-child without telling me you're a man-child. This is why women don't want to have your babies. Poor whining patriarchy saying that they can't go out for beers with the boys. The number of men in 1990 that said they had a close friend to call on didn't have a close friend to call on in an emergency was 3%. In 2020, it was 15%.
Wow.
So it's 5x'd in that time. The most common answer to the question, how many close friends do you have, is 0. It's not the average, but it's the most common. More people have no friends to call than any other number. The single biggest risk to a man under the age of 30 is his own hands. Male loneliness is a big problem. And when a study comes out that says this is a way that we can fix male loneliness, it gets disparaged as part of a luxurious chattering class that all men have. If women have a problem, we say, what can we do to fix the world? If men have a problem, we say, what is it that men aren't doing where they don't fix themselves?
I don't want people to think that we're trying to preach this like Andrew Tate version of toxic masculinity and anything like that.
Stuff. No.
Right, yeah. We're not saying that. We're saying let's get back to what the church is actually producing. And what the church is actually saying is outlined perfectly in the Family Proclamation. Successful marriages and families are established and maintained on principles of faith, prayer, repentance, forgiveness, respect, love, compassion, work, and wholesome recreational activities. So, what is the takeaway for the average father in the age of home-centered church? What would you say?
Well, I think that just take that phrase and just scrap it and realize that you are a human being who has a certain level of things in your life that you need in order to be like a functional man and be
Yeah.
okay with that, and then discuss that with your wife and just do a system check. And if your wife loves you, which I'm sure every husband's wife does almost, right? She'll be honest and say, yeah, I think you need more friends, or I think you need a break here, or I think you need to actually try harder over here. And that's going to be a very uncomfortable conversation because you need to share that with both spouses. But just clear the air, discuss what needs to be done and who can do it, and make sure that's as equal as possible to your strengths and weaknesses, and then go forth from there. That's what I think needs
Yeah.
to happen.
I like that. So you're saying scrap the whole mantra, get it
Yeah,
out of your
just
head, replace it with happy spouse, happy house, where both of
at the
you are
very
focused on
least.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah, at the very
I
least.
like
Yeah.
that idea. I very much like that idea. So if anything that we read in that list of 10, if any of those resonated with you, or if you were like, yeah, a lot of those sound very uncannily familiar to me, I would say do exactly what Tanner did. Sit down with your spouse, counsel together, establish boundaries, and start taking care of yourself. And if you need help, if you're like, I don't have any friends, we are trying to combat that. We've got a Discord server called Dads Need Friends. It's not just for dads. If you are a friend, you can join. So
Yeah, you don't have to be a dad. You can just be a friend.
yeah. So if you need friends, we've got book clubs going on. We've got games nights that are happening a couple times a week. So you can have a guys' night virtually. You can work if you can work from home. You can play from home now too. So
That's right.
so come and join us. Take care of yourself. Regain your vision and regain your strength is what I would say is the takeaway for men in the age of home-centered church. So with that being said, I know we're getting close to time. So my name is Hayden Holm. This is Tanner, and this is Salty Saints.